The boots still had snow inside them when the ice finally gave them back. 12 years frozen in a glacier, the leather barely cracked, laces tied in perfect double knots, exactly as Kieran Holloway had tied them on December 14th, 2011. His wool socks were still tucked inside, gray and thick, the kind his grandmother had knitted for him every Christmas since he was 7. Inside the left boot liner, wrapped in a plastic hotel laundry bag, searchers found a crumpled train ticket from Geneva to Chamonix dated December 13th, the day before he walked into the white and never came back. Kieran Holloway was a 29-year-old systems analyst from Birmingham who had never seen real mountains until he stepped off that train in the French Alps. His heaviest outdoor experience was weekend walks through Cannock Chase. He owned no crampons, no ice axe, no avalanche beacon. His winter gear consisted of a North Face jacket he bought at a clearance sale and hiking boots designed for English moorlands. He had been battling severe depression for 3 years, taking a cocktail of sertraline and mirtazapine that kept him functional but felt like living underwater. 2 weeks before his trip, his girlfriend Emma had moved out of their flat, taking her cat and most of the furniture. His mother had died the previous spring. What drove a man with no mountain experience to attempt a solo winter hike on Europe's deadliest peak during the onset of a major storm system? The answer was sitting in his hostel locker in Chamonix, a plastic pill organizer, full, labeled with the days of the week. He had deliberately left his medication behind. Kieran arrived in Chamonix on December 13th, carrying a single backpack, and wearing the same clothes he had traveled in. The hostel receptionist later told investigators that he seemed spacey but determined, asking specifically about trails that would take him up toward Mont Blanc. She handed him a standard safety pamphlet about winter conditions and watched him stuff it into his pocket without reading it. He paid for 3 nights, but told her he might be back early if the weather turned bad. He bought a day pass for the Aiguille du Midi cable car and spent his first afternoon riding up to 3842 meters, staring out at the glaciated peaks through thick glass windows. That evening, he called his coworker David from a payphone outside the hostel. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. David later told investigators that Kieran sounded more focused than he had in months, but also strange, like he was talking from very far away. Kieran told him the mountain air was already helping, that a solo hike would clear the noise and fix everything fast. When David asked if he had proper gear, Kieran laughed and said he was tougher than he looked. The call ended abruptly when Kieran ran out of coins. Weather reports for December 14th showed a massive low-pressure system moving in from the northwest, bringing winds up to 80 kilometers per hour and snow accumulations of up to 60 centimeters above 2,000 meters. The forecast had been posted at every trailhead and cable car station for 2 days. Kieran either never saw it or chose to ignore it completely. He left the hostel at 6:47 a.m., according to security cameras. The receptionist watched him walk toward a map toward the Aiguille du Midi base station, carrying nothing but a small day pack and wearing the same jacket and boots from the day before. She assumed he was just taking another cable car ride. The lift operator who sold him the ticket remembered him, because he kept asking questions about weather conditions at the summit, nodding seriously at each answer, but buying the ticket anyway. The cable car system runs in 2 stages. First to Plan de l'Aiguille at 2317 meters, then to the final summit station at 3842 meters. Kieran rode both segments. Security footage shows him stepping off the final car at 8:23 a.m. into conditions that were already deteriorating rapidly. Visibility was dropping, wind was picking up, and the temperature was minus 18 degrees Celsius with a wind chill that pushed it below minus 30. Most tourists stay inside the heated viewing areas or take the cable car back down within an hour. Kieran walked straight to the exit that leads onto the Vallée Blanche, a glaciated plateau that serves as the starting point for serious alpine routes. The exit is marked with warning signs in 5 languages. A French alpinist named Philippe Moreau was gearing up for his own climb when he noticed Kieran standing at the platform edge, looking out at the expanse of white. Moreau approached him and asked in English if he had climbing experience. Kieran said he was just going for a walk. When Moreau saw his gear, no helmet, no harness, no rope, wearing sneakers underneath his hiking boots because he thought they would provide better grip, he spent 10 minutes trying to convince him to turn back. The weather was getting worse by the hour. The glacier was full of hidden crevasses, and even experienced climbers were canceling their plans. Kieran listened politely, thanked him, and stepped onto the ice anyway. That was the last confirmed sighting of Kieran Holloway alive. Moreau watched him walk toward the Vallée Blanche until he disappeared into the blowing snow. The time was 9:17 a.m. The storm that hit Mont Blanc that afternoon was one of the worst of the decade. Winds reached 110 kilometers per hour at elevation. Snow fell so fast that visibility dropped to less than 5 meters. The temperature plummeted to minus 35 degrees Celsius. Even the rescue teams had to suspend operations and wait for conditions to improve. Kieran's absence wasn't noticed until December 16th, when he failed to check out of his hostel. The receptionist found his room key still hanging behind the front. Desk and his belongings untouched in room 237. His passport was on the nightstand. His medication was still in the locker downstairs, pills counted and organized for the week ahead. She called the local gendarmerie. The initial search began on December 17th, as soon as weather permitted. Helicopter crews covered the most likely routes from the Aiguille du Midi station toward the popular climbing areas. Ground teams followed marked trails and checked mountain huts. They found nothing. The storm had deposited nearly 2 meters of fresh snow across the massif, burying any tracks or equipment Kieran might have left behind. Search operations continued for 8 days, covering over 200 square kilometers of terrain. Teams used avalanche probes to check areas where someone might have fallen into a crevasse or been buried by shifting snow. Helicopters equipped with heat-sensing equipment flew grid patterns across the glaciers. Local guides, who knew every crevasse and cliff face on the mountain, volunteered their time. They found nothing. The search was officially suspended on December 25th. The lead investigator, Captain Laurent Dubois of the Chamonix PG Kitchen and Rescue Service, filed a report concluding that Kieran Holloway had most likely fallen into a deep crevasse on the Vallée Blanche Glacier and been buried by avalanche activity. His body, the report stated, would eventually emerge from the glacier ice in 20 to 30 years as natural ice flow carried it toward the valley floor. The case was classified as a mountain accident and closed. For 12 years, the glacier kept its secret. The Mer de Glace, the massive ice river that flows down from Mont Blanc toward Chamonix, moves at an average rate of 70 meters per year. Ice that falls into crevasses near the summit emerges decades later at the glacier's terminus, carrying with it the preserved remains of climbers, hikers, and aircraft that have been lost in the high mountains. Local guides call it the glacier's memory. Climate change has accelerated this process dramatically. Rising temperatures have caused alpine glaciers to retreat at unprecedented rates, exposing debris and remains that were once locked permanently in ice. The Mer de Glace alone has shrunk by over 120 meters vertically since 1990. Areas that were covered by thick ice for centuries are now bare rock and gravel. On July 23, 2023, record-breaking heat waves pushed temperatures in the Alps above 35 degrees Celsius, even at high elevations. The ice near the Mer de Glace terminus began melting faster than anyone had ever seen. Local environmental scientist Dr. Marie Blanchard was conducting routine measurements of ice thickness when she noticed something dark protruding from a section of exposed glacier face near the 1,400-meter elevation. She approached carefully, knowing that glacial ice often reveals the remains of missing climbers. What she found were 2 brown leather hiking boots still laced, sitting upright in a small depression where the ice had melted around them. They looked almost new except for some surface weathering from sun exposure. She could see wool socks still inside them. Dr. Blanchard immediately contacted the PGHM Rescue Service. Captain Dubois, now nearing retirement, responded personally to the scene. He had investigated dozens of glacier recoveries over his career, but these boots were different. They were positioned as if someone had simply stepped out of them, not scattered or damaged like equipment usually is after decades in moving ice. The recovery team excavated the area around the boots using steam and hand tools, working carefully to preserve any evidence. Inside the left boot, wrapped in a hotel laundry bag that had somehow remained waterproof, they found the train ticket. The date and destination matched exactly with Kieran Holloway's known movements. There was also a small piece of paper with a phone number written in blue ink, the number for the Birmingham Mental Health Clinic where Kieran had been receiving treatment. But no other remains were found. The boots had emerged from the ice alone, without any trace of the person who had worn them. Forensic analysis confirmed that the boots matched the brand and size that Kieran had been wearing, based on hostile security footage. DNA traces from the wool socks matched samples, taken from his Birmingham flat. But the rest of Kieran Holloway remained somewhere in the ice above. Dr. Blanchard's analysis of the glacier's movement patterns suggested that the boots had fallen into a crevasse somewhere in the upper Valais. Blanche, probably within the first few hours after Kieran left the cable car station. The ice had carried them slowly downward through the glacier system over 12 years, preserving them in a frozen tomb until rising temperatures finally set them free. The discovery reopened questions about what had actually happened to Kieran on December 14th, 2011. The fact that his boots emerged without his body suggested that he had somehow managed to remove them before whatever happened next. Some investigators theorized that he had fallen into water at the bottom of a crevasse and kicked off his boots while trying to stay afloat. Others suggested that he had removed them while suffering from severe hypothermia, a condition that can cause victims to undress as their body temperature drops. The medical examiner who reviewed the case, Dr. Antoine Mercier, pointed out disturbing details that had been overlooked in the original investigation. Kieran's prescription bottles showed he had been taking 150 milligrams of sertraline daily, plus 30 milligrams of mirtazapine at bedtime. Stopping these medications abruptly causes severe withdrawal symptoms within 48 hours. Electric shock sensations, In the brain, extreme dizziness and what patients describe as head zaps that feel like lightning bolts firing inside the skull. By the time Kieran stepped onto the Glacier, he would have been experiencing the full force of antidepressant discontinuation syndrome. Dr. Mercier had treated dozens of patients through similar withdrawals and knew the symptoms could be catastrophic. The brain zaps alone can cause people to lose their balance without warning. Combined with altitude sickness, extreme cold, and the disorienting effects of blowing snow, Kieran would have been fighting his own nervous system even before the mountain tried to kill him. His decision to quit his medication cold turkey wasn't just dangerous, it was potentially suicidal. The hostel staff revealed additional details that painted a clearer picture of Kieran's mental state during his final days. The cleaning woman who serviced his room found his bed hadn't been slept in on December 13th. His clothes were folded in perfect stacks on the chair, arranged with military precision that seemed obsessive rather than neat. The bathroom mirror had water spots on it, suggesting he had spent a long time staring at his reflection. Most telling was what she found in the wastebasket: 17 crumpled pages torn from a journal, all covered in handwriting too small to read without magnification. Police recovered these pages and had them analyzed by a forensic document examiner. The writing showed progressive deterioration over several hours, starting with controlled, deliberate sentences and degenerating into barely legible scrawl filled with mathematical calculations. Kieran had been computing distances, elevation gains, and estimated walking times for various routes on Mont Blanc. But mixed between these practical calculations were stranger notations, repeated phrases about the signal getting clearer, and references to static in my head going quiet. The final entry, written in letters so small they required magnification to read, consisted of a single sentence repeated 23 times. "The mountain will remember what I forget." But Captain Dubois, who had handled the original investigation, believed these details only confirmed what he had suspected from the beginning. Kieran's decision to leave his medication behind, his repeated statements about clearing his mind, and his determination to go into the mountains alone despite having no experience all pointed to a deliberate choice. Perhaps, Dubois suggested, Kieran had removed his boots himself in the moments before the cold took him, a final act of someone who had found what he came to the mountains looking for. The physical evidence supported this theory in disturbing ways. The boots had been found positioned upright and parallel to each other, as if placed deliberately rather than lost in a struggle. The laces were tied in perfect double knots, exactly as they would have been if someone had carefully removed them, while sitting down. Most significantly, both socks were still inside the boots, pulled off with the kind of careful motion that suggested conscious intent rather than panicked desperation. The boots were returned to Kieran's family in Birmingham. His sister Claire, who had spent 12 years wondering what happened to her brother, said the discovery brought both relief and new questions. She had always hoped that he had survived somehow, maybe lost his memory and started a new life somewhere else. Finding his boots confirmed that he had died on the mountain, but learning that he had deliberately left his medication behind helped her understand that he had been suffering more than anyone had realized. Claire revealed details about her brother's final months that investigators had never heard. 3 weeks before his trip to France, Kieran had given away most of his possessions. He donated his entire book collection to a local charity, claiming he was decluttering for a fresh start. He canceled his gym membership, closed his savings account, and transferred the money to Claire with a note saying it was for emergencies. Most disturbing was his behavior at their mother's grave on November 28th, exactly 2 weeks before he left for Chamonix. Claire had met him at the cemetery for what she thought was a routine visit. Instead, she found Kieran kneeling beside the headstone with his hands pressed against the frozen ground, talking in whispers she couldn't understand. When she approached, he looked up with tears streaming down his face and said, "I can't hear her anymore. The pills make everything too quiet." He spent 2 hours at the grave that day, the longest visit since the funeral. Claire now realized it had been a goodbye. The Birmingham Mental Health Clinic where Kieran had been receiving treatment also provided crucial missing pieces. His therapist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had been trying to reach him for 3 weeks before his disappearance. Kieran had missed 2 scheduled appointments and stopped returning phone calls. When she finally contacted his workplace, she learned that he had requested emergency leave and told his supervisor he was having medication issues that needed to be resolved quickly. Dr. Mitchell's notes from their final session on November 15th showed that Kieran had been asking specific questions about antidepressant withdrawal. He claimed he was thinking about trying life without the chemical buffer and wanted to know how long it would take for the medications to completely leave his system. When Dr. Mitchell warned him about the dangers of stopping cold turkey, Kieran had smiled and said he wasn't planning to quit. He just wanted to understand how the drugs worked. The session notes ended with a red flag. Patient exhibiting signs of concealed planning. Recommend immediate follow-up. But Dr. Mitchell had been unable to schedule that follow-up appointment. Kieran had left Birmingham 3 days later. The train ticket still legible after 12 years in the ice was the last concrete evidence of Kieran Holloway's journey to Mont Blanc. The one-way ticket from Geneva to Chamonix cost €22 and was purchased at 1447 on December 13th, 2011. There was no return ticket found in his belongings or purchased under his name. He had arrived in the Alps with no plan to leave them. Swiss railway records showed additional details that investigators found disturbing. Kieran had purchased his ticket with cash at Geneva's main train station, but security cameras revealed he had been waiting on the platform for over 4 hours before the train departed. Station personnel remembered him because he kept asking about weather conditions in Chamonix, specifically whether storms would affect mountain access. When told that a major weather system was approaching, he seemed pleased rather than concerned. The ticket stub found in his boot also contained handwritten notes in blue ink, elevation figures for various Mont Blanc routes, and what appeared to be time calculations. The numbers suggested he had been planning to reach at least 4,000 meters altitude, well into the death zone for unprepared hikers. Most chilling was a notation at the bottom. If signal clears at 4807, stay until sunset. The figure 4807 is the exact elevation of Mont Blanc's summit. Climate scientists estimate that the mer de glace will continue retreating at accelerating rates over the coming decades. More equipment and remains from decades of mountain accidents will emerge as the ice that has preserved them finally melts away. The boots that held Kieran Holloway's last steps were just the beginning of the glacier's long process of giving back what the mountains have taken. Dr. Blanchard's research into glacier dynamics revealed disturbing implications for the hundreds of people still missing in the Mont Blanc Massif. Ice core analysis showed that sections of the mer de glace containing remains from the 1990s and 2000s would begin surfacing within the next 5 to 10 years. Families who had waited decades for closure would soon face the same painful mixture of relief and fresh grief that Kieran's sister had experienced. But the most haunting discovery came from analyzing the ice layers where Kieran's boots had been preserved. The glacier moves in predictable patterns, like a frozen river flowing toward the valley. By tracing the ice's path backward, Dr. Blanchard could determine exactly where and when Kieran had fallen into the crevasse system. Her calculations showed he had made it much farther than anyone had expected. The position where his boots entered the ice suggested Kieran had traveled at least 8 kilometers from the Aiguille du Midi station, crossing some of the most dangerous terrain on the mountain. This meant he had survived for hours in conditions that should have killed him within minutes. He had navigated hidden crevasses, avoided avalanche zones, and climbed to an elevation of approximately 3,600 meters before finally succumbing to the mountain. For an inexperienced hiker carrying no proper equipment, this journey was essentially impossible. Veteran alpine guides struggled to cover that distance in good weather with full gear and rope teams. That Kieran had managed it alone in a storm while experiencing severe medication withdrawal suggested a level of determination that bordered on the superhuman. Dr. Blanchard found this determination reflected in the glacier itself. The ice surrounding Kieran's boots contained unusually high levels of adrenaline metabolites, chemical traces of extreme stress that had been preserved in the frozen water. Someone had been fighting for survival right up until the end, pushing his body beyond every reasonable limit. The mountain had tested him completely before finally claiming him. But somewhere above, still locked in ice that may not melt for another decade, the rest of Kieran Holloway continues his slow journey toward the valley floor. The glacier remembers everything, but it gives up its secrets only when the heat finally becomes too much to bear. And in an age of unprecedented warming, that moment is coming faster than anyone expected. Glaciologists predict that by 2040, ice layers from the early 2010s will reach the terminus where Kieran's boots emerged. If his body entered the glacier system at the same time as his boots, the next pieces of his story will surface within the next 15 years. Claire Holloway, now 48, says she will be waiting when that day comes. She has already contacted Dr. Blanchard about monitoring the glacier's retreat and has requested notification if anything else emerges. The space where his boots had rested in the ice is now just bare rock and running water. Dr. Blanchard returns, there periodically to check for additional remains, but the glacier has moved on, carrying its frozen cargo further down the mountain toward an uncertain future. The ice that once held Kieran's boots for 12 years has melted and flowed away, joining the rivers that run through Chamonix and eventually reach the Mediterranean Sea. What remains is a mystery wrapped in wool socks and leather, a train ticket, that tells the story of a one-way journey, and the knowledge that sometimes the mountains keep their promises in ways that no one expects. Kieran Holloway had told his coworker that a solo hike would fix everything fast. In the end, the mountain gave him exactly what he was looking for, even if it took 12 years to deliver the proof.